Welcome to Transformative Principal, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I'm your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Welcome to Transformative Principal. Today, I am so excited to have Cahlan Sharp on the program. Cahlan is a highly versatile leader, technologist, entrepreneur, engineer, and investor. He is passionate about technology, education, and building things that matter. He's a serial entrepreneur, and he has participated in lots of failed startups, which we're probably not going to get into, but that sounds like a great story on the side. He's the founder of Dead Mountain. He started the microschooling craze with Prenda, and he's now CTO and co-founder at School AI, which is a sponsor of the Summer of AI series here on Transformative Principal. Cahlan, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jethro. Excited to be here.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot. Tell me your favorite startup failure that you've been involved in, and then I'll tell you mine also.
Well, one of my favorites would have to be, I had some friends and we had this crazy idea of creating this incentivized polling system. So I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you probably remember, but back in the day before there was things like Reddit and Stack Overflow, to find people asking questions and getting answers to those questions, you had to troll through these forums and go through pages and pages and pages of answers. And so we thought, well, what if we created this system where you could upvote or downvote people's answers, right? Which that sounds totally like obvious nowadays, but back then it was kind of a novel thing. We wanted to create this like game around it where it was like every day there was a new question of the day and the best answers got, prizes and things like that. It was a little bit more niche than like a Stack Overflow or something like that. But we really, I built this whole system and these badges and levels and points and all this stuff, and it was so fun. It was honestly a blast, and I thought we had something really great. But we ultimately had no business model behind it. We had no idea what we were doing. None of us had really built anything like this before. And so it just sort of died. It was funny because we all kind of thought about it as like, wow, that was such a cool thing. Why couldn't we ever get that to work? And then of course, 4 or 5 years later, Reddit became the front page of the internet and was like the tool everybody used. And, this upvote downvote system was just a normal thing. And it was kind of cool on both sides, because on the one hand, it was like, okay, clearly we did not execute the way that we thought we needed, we didn't know what we were doing ultimately, and that's why we couldn't get it off the ground. At the same time, it was also kind of validation, like we were onto something, right? We knew what the problem was. We just didn't have a good way to, build a solution or get it out there. And so maybe that's a good example of a failure where it's like, a lot of people talk about ideas like, oh, if I'd had that idea. And really, it's not about the idea. It's about being able to execute it and actually get it out there in front of people. And so that was a good failure for us.
Yeah, that's good. So mine is there's this thing called Startup Weekends. You were probably part of those, right?
Yep,
Startup Weekend Provo. Do you remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
So I was at that one, and I created this thing with a group of people called Draw My Doll, where you take a little drawing that the kid does, and then you turn it into a physical doll. And we got the app, we got all created, made it work, like had a system and a process for doing everything. And then I was like, okay, thanks everybody. I got it from here, which was like the stupidest thing I ever could have done, because I didn't know how to do anything. And I just had the idea. And then a couple, probably like 9 months later, once I said, okay, this isn't working, I just shut everything down. I saw Oprah Winfrey had someone on who was doing the exact same thing and made $100 million or something from this business. And I was like, oh, that would have been good if I would have not been so egotistical, thinking that I could do it all myself and would have relied on others. So that was mine. And I put a link here in the show notes if you're listening and you want to go see what that actually looked like, because we made a beautiful promotional video, and it was awesome. And it actually was really cool. But my own hubris got in the way, which is unfortunate. So there's a little lesson for everybody.
That's how you learn.
That's right. So anyway, so there's that. So in our conversation today, what do you think people need to walk away from based on what we're talking about? What should they look forward to hearing today?
I would say that if you're somebody who's heard about AI, especially, and what it means for you or for your kids, what it means for education specifically, whether you should, fear that it's going to take over the world or make us into, more productive, more able to learn human beings, then this is a great episode for you.
Cool. I really appreciate how you are answering the question around data and privacy and what to do about that. And my favorite part of that is that you are honest that you don't know the answer and that you're okay with that. Because I think that is really powerful, but the way that you are approaching it, I think is good and definitely something that we need to be paying attention to over time. So I thank you for that. I'll get to my interview here with Cahlan in just a moment. Cahlan, tell us about, well, you did Prenda. Tell us about that experience, what that was like building that, why you got into that and made that something that was so powerful. And also the timing of that was just amazing, by the way. So some people don't know what Prenda is, so give us a little overview of that situation first.
Yeah, of course. So Prenda began, well, I connected with a friend of mine out of Arizona that was working on a concept that involved helping libraries to launch kids coding curriculum. So, after school coding programs run by the library. And one of the challenges they were having, I kind of was initially just sort of advising and helping out with them. But one of the challenges they were having was these librarians, recruiting actual software developers to teach these after school classes was really challenging, especially in areas where maybe it was a bit more rural, and these librarians were kind of on an island saying, we'd love to do this curriculum, but we have no idea how to teach it. And so they sort of flipped the model from having experienced seasoned software engineers teaching these classes to kids to librarians teaching the classes to kids. And it was kind of this like total shift in how you help somebody prepare to teach a subject that maybe they themselves aren't very familiar with. And so they totally redesigned the approach based on that premise. And they sort of stumbled on this way to approach helping kids learn something that was a lot more focused around the student rather than what the teacher had experience in or had a basic knowledge of. So it was a lot more focused on the method than it was the content, and helping kids to walk through the curriculum themselves using tools, using things that were available out there. It was a really powerful model. And so learning from that, my friend Kelly Smith in just suburban Mesa, Arizona, decided to try an experiment, and he convinced I think it was 8 families to take their kids out of school and send those kids instead to his house. And they were of varying ages, but mostly junior high age. And he basically held a microschool in his own home. This was in 2017, I believe. And so he kind of was just experimenting with it himself as he was going through it, trying to figure out like, okay, if this weren't me doing this, how would I do this? How would I help support another person that was doing? Started calling these people guides, people that could help children work through, topics like math, English, reading, that sort of thing, kind of the core subjects, and then giving them a lot of autonomy and, a lot of freedom to kind of explore things at their own pace, set their own goals. And he really acted more as a cheerleader, a coach, a facilitator, focused a lot on social, kind of social dynamics and debates and Socratic discussions and things like that. And it was a really powerful model, and started to get a lot of interest from other people in the community saying, how can we be a part of this? How can we, help our kids with this sort of thing? And a lot of the people that were initially attracted to this model were people, and you could kind of categorize them in a few different ways, but I would maybe oversimplify it to say that, you had parents that were unsatisfied with what the traditional experience was giving them for whatever reason. It could be disagreements with how things were being taught. It could be that their child had particular needs, whether they were maybe academically advanced or maybe academically they were struggling, that they didn't really fit the one size fits all kind of treadmill model, or they lived in rural areas where the schools just were really struggling and they just didn't have a lot of options, right? And so they started to see just a whole bunch of different types of folk coming out of the woodwork interested in this model. And so when I joined, it really became the question we were trying to ask ourselves was, how can we help, it was typically moms, how can we help moms to create these classrooms in their living rooms and give them the support and the resources they need to actually help these students to be successful. And so we spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of it's very emotional work. These moms are, I don't know the best way to put it, but they're really putting themselves out there, right? They're taking on the burden of helping these kids, figure out what their future is going to look like. And as a result, there's just a lot of care, a lot of support that these guides needed. And so anyway, the business, the company, the mission really was all about empowering learners. Still is, right? It's a wonderful company, and I still have many friends, including Kelly Smith, the CEO, still over there. And it was just it was an amazing experience in helping people who, again, were sort of dissatisfied with the status quo to experiment with a new direction and watch it really take hold. I mean, there was some really cool stories where students would come in, a couple grade levels behind in math or reading, and they would end the year doing much, much better, in some cases even getting ahead. And those were the kind of stories that kept us going. They were the stories that really fueled the guides' experiences. And it was so fun to see how different these individual micro schools could be. We'd go visit some in rural areas where the kids were, going out for breaks and they were petting the goats, or they were helping with the baby goats. And in other areas, they had these cool playground setups and pirate ships and stuff. And it was just, part of it was so neat just to see the diversity and all the different things that a guide could bring to the table, both from their community and from themselves. And so we started working on that, before the pandemic. And then once the pandemic hit in 2020, it was suddenly like, we never ever imagined that the president of the United States would be talking about homeschooling, and suddenly it was like, the entire, and not just for us, but for the entire education industry, everything was just turned completely upside down. And so we went through a really difficult period of trying to figure out how we were going to support people in that environment, and what we were and what we weren't going to do, and getting caught on different sides of the political battles that ensued from that. It was a crazy, crazy time. But still, again, the mission for Prenda continues to be just empowering learners and helping them to figure out, to take control and to take to be an active role and participant in their education. And that's something I think, just sort of stepping back for a second, that's something that I've always felt deeply about. It's one of the reasons that attracted me to Prenda in the first place, was because I got into Dev Mountain, for example, because I wanted to take students who were really actively engaged and cared and were ready to learn, and help them get to wherever they wanted to go as fast as possible. And many times at Dev Mountain, we would kind of make the sort of comment along these lines. It was sort of like, if we could only help kids younger to learn how to be more actively engaged in their education, to take an active role, to take responsibility over their education, like, this would be natural for everybody. One of the first things we had to do at Dev Mountain was to sort of like deprogram people from what they thought school was going to be. Because when people came to this boot camp, some of them would sit in the back and just sort of like expect that if they survived the 12-week program, just sort of being there and passively being a part of the experience, that they would be fine. And we had to quickly, sort of dispel any myths like that and say, look, you are going to get out of this what you put into it, which of course is how education is in general, but we sort of doesn't really get reinforced because of all of the different incentives and ways things are set up and so on and so forth. So anyway.
Well, and here's the amazing thing, Cahlan, is that that is not actually how the education system works. The education system, that is how learning works, but that is not how the education system works. And so our traditional K-12 public school model is really about surviving and making it through and being part of an assembly, being a cog in a machine. And real learning is about 100% what you put in, you get out. And it is only based on that. And that's where there's this important distinction between learning and going to school or education. And I think that that's really important. I think this is a good place also to segue into what you're doing now with School AI, because there's the onset of accessible artificial intelligence has made it possible for people to really do things differently. So talk to us about what you're doing with School AI and how that same vision of helping kids learn, or teachers learn, or anybody learn based on the learner rather than based on the content. Tell us about what you're doing now and what's exciting there.
Absolutely, and I think empowerment is another really good word to use here, because
Yeah.
you think about how how empowered is a child or any human being with the right tools in their hands, right? Whether it be calculators or personal computers, or even things like rudimentary tools, right? They make our lives easier. They give us the power to do the things, get leverage to do things that maybe we couldn't do otherwise, or at least would be very, very difficult. And I see AI, I think a lot of us here see AI in that light. AI is an empowering tool, potentially. It cannot be, it's a tool. So in and of itself, it doesn't necessarily have, a thing that it does, but it's how we use it. And I believe that if we put these tools in the hands of people like educators, in the hands of people like students, and set them up for success, then it can be an extremely empowering tool. One of my favorite descriptions of AI, as you can imagine, since I've been, working in a field or in a company that has like AI in the name, I've had people just asking, what is this thing about AI? What's going on? Some people very almost fearfully asking me, like, is AI going to take over the world? Like, what's the deal?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I totally understand the sense of concern, especially with how much things have changed over the last year with AI. But one of my favorite descriptions to give of AI is I say, look, and this is not my idea, but I read it somewhere. I said, what would you do if you had an assistant next to you that was super intelligent? Right? Somebody you could sit next to you at all times, and you could ask them any question you want, and they were super intelligent. How would you use that? What would you do with that? And when you put it that way, people start asking the right questions. Well, I would have them help me with my homework, or I'd have them help me figure out this complex problem that I'm facing at work, or I'd have them look at my writing and see how I can improve, right? And that's, frankly, I think one of the first ways that AI can be an empowering tool, a force for change in education. I told my kids, I spent some time when I was first diving deep into the landscape of AI at the first of the year, kind of understanding the current state of everything. We were on a road trip, and I was listening to these podcasts and these YouTube videos of people kind of going into it. And I was just like constantly having my mind blown as to what these tools could do. And I would, every 15 minutes or so, I would take off my headphones and look at my wife and say, this is going to change everything. This is going to change everything. And I was just sort of geeking out, and she's sitting there like, oh boy, here we go again. Me getting excited about some new thing. But AI truly, it is gonna change everything. One of the things I'm telling my kids right now, I have two older ones that are gonna finish high school in the next few years, but my two younger ones especially, I said, by the time you go to college or whatever you decide to do after high school, you will have access to a personal tutor, AI tutor, that can teach you or help you learn just about anything you want to learn. It can look at your strengths and your likes and dislikes and the things that you enjoy doing. And it can customize content and tutoring and help to tailor anything to your personal learning style. I know maybe isn't the right word to use, but it can basically tailor any content to you. And that's really, and you can look at that from a teacher's perspective too. What would you do as a teacher if you had some super intelligent assistant that was always ready to help you and always ready to give you feedback and contribute? And that's the kind of stuff that we're trying to build at School AI, things that will help empower teachers to create meaningful experiences with students, for students to create meaningful experiences with learning, and then ultimately to help everybody surface the right kind of insights, the right kind of information, so that we all know what's going on. I think Caleb and I both come from backgrounds of teaching. He came from a public background. I came from a more adult education, private background. And one of the things that we both talk about is the biggest question in our minds was, how is everybody doing in the class? You finish going through a subject and you're kind of trying to get some visual, verbal, nonverbal feedback. Okay, what's everybody's feeling on this? And that's one of the biggest hinge points in your teaching is like, okay, is everybody on board? Do we got 50% of the class on board and 50% we got to figure something out to help get them caught up? So surfacing that kind of meaningful information as to where everybody's at in the class and who's doing well, who's struggling, what challenges are they facing? That's the kind of information that can really superpower a teacher's experience and help them be, we're already, I don't think this is my phrase, I've borrowed it from somebody here at the company, but teachers are some of the most under-resourced, overworked people around, right? And so giving them some tools so that they can actually, function at a higher level and do more with less is hopefully empowering. And I definitely think it's life-changing for students when it's done the right way.
Yeah, and I think this idea of teachers understanding where their kids are at is so vital to the education and learning process. And I say that intentionally, the education process of what we were talking about before, that there's like a process we go through to move kids along. And that has been very opaque despite teachers' best efforts for a very long time. But you're trying to build something that makes it so that teachers can see how kids are really doing. And while multiple choice tests do not give you the best answers, but they make it really easy to grade, right? And they make it really
Yeah.
easy for you to see how people are doing. But the questions that do give better answers are open-ended, where kids can say what's really going on, but those take so much longer to grade, it's nearly impossible for you to do that. So tell us about some of the things you're doing to make it easier for teachers to understand how kids are doing right in the moment, and what that really looks like. And feel free to be a little bit nerdy and explain what you're doing so that we can really grasp it, because I've seen it and I've seen it work, and it's really amazing. And I want to make sure that people understand how cool it can be when it's in the hands of somebody who is like you said at the beginning, focused on learning, that's focused on the student, not just focused on the content. I think that's such a powerful place to start from, and so
Yeah.
different from what we usually have.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the areas that we're most excited about right now is this thing that we're calling spaces, which are teachers, teacher generated, but student facing chat sessions that can accomplish a variety of goals for the teacher and surface a bunch of meaningful data. So I'll give you a couple of examples. You get into class, and as a teacher, maybe you're starting a new unit. Maybe you're a junior high English teacher. You want to start talking about Edgar Allan Poe or something like that. You want to find out maybe which of your students have even heard about Edgar Allan Poe before. And maybe you want to like reinforce, some kind of personal connection with them, like find out, what was their favorite thing they did over the summer, right? So in our tool, we give you the ability to create a bell ringer. We call it a pulse bell ringer. Pulse, kind of this pulse check idea where you're trying to figure out where your students are at. So you create this bell ringer space, and you put in some data in there. You say, here's what I'm going to teach. I'm going to teach Edgar Allan Poe. I want to know, the question I want to ask the students is, what was your favorite thing you did over the summer? And that creates a Kahoot style session where the students can all join. They'll have these individual chat sessions with a chatbot, and the chatbot is asking them all in a very conversational, personal, informal tone, hey, how's it going, Susie? What was your summer like? What was your favorite thing you did this summer? And she's answering, and then it starts asking her about Edgar Allan Poe, and it maybe is giving her some little insights, getting her excited about what's coming up. And it takes maybe 5 minutes or so. The teacher, in the meantime, is getting some real-time insights of, what were my students' favorite activities over the summer? Oh, I can see that 5 of them spent time at Lake Powell or something, so I can maybe mention that as a part of my lesson, or connect with those students afterwards and say, hey, I've been there, it was so fun, or something like that, kind of reinforcing some of the social connection. And at the same time, I can also see, like, here's how everybody's feeling about the lesson. Nobody's ever heard of Edgar Allan Poe before. Okay, so I need to start from the very, very basics, right? The other side of that, we call the Pulse exit ticket, is where maybe you finish teaching a lesson. Maybe we can switch gears for a second. You're talking about photosynthesis or something in maybe a 7th grade biology class, and you've went through all of your different learning outcomes for the session, and you feel like you've done a pretty good job, but you also have no idea really where everybody stands in regards to what you've taught. So you have all the students fire up an exit ticket, very similar experience. You as the teacher go in and put in some inputs, and then fire up the session, and the students all join. And now this chatbot has a little bit different direction, where it's kind of working through each of the learning outcomes with the student, and it's trying to figure out where they're at with each of those learning outcomes. Now, it's not giving them like a multiple choice assessment. We're not going to put this in a grade book or anything, but it's giving back the teacher some directional data as to how the student feels confident, or what their experience was with each of those learning outcomes. And so you as a teacher start to get an idea, okay, half the class really understood my first 2 learning outcomes. Nobody got the second 2. So maybe we need to spend an extra day review, or maybe we need to have an extra, kind of supplementary activity or something like that to reinforce those learning outcomes. The idea there being, we sort of look at class in sort of 3 sections. You have kind of the beginning introductory part, you have the major instruction part, which there's so many things you could do there, and then you have this sort of exit ticket piece. And we think we can really, initially be on both ends of that and give the teacher so much powerful data as to what's going on inside the class.
Yeah, so a couple cool things that I think are really neat from that. Number one, doing that pulse ticket at the beginning, you get to focus on some social emotional aspects, building relationships, helping kids know that you care about them and want to know what's going on with them, that you can actually have that information in a quick, efficient manner rather than having each kid stand up and give a 2-minute oral report of their summer. And by the way, say something about Edgar Allan Poe, whether or not they know about him. But then the other cool thing about that is that you can bring in those things, and even, I imagine, have the chatbot work with the student to write a poem in the style of Edgar Allan Poe about their summer vacation, which would be like a really cool way to introduce them to poetry without it being like, oh, gross, I hate poetry. A really neat way to like get them excited about what he could be writing about. And Poe's got some really great stuff that is especially good for kids, that it's a little scary but not too scary, and a little weird but not too weird. And so you can do stuff with his poetry that's really neat. And then on the exit ticket piece, I taught a class, language arts class, and I would give these quizzes every week to see how kids were doing. And if kids didn't do well on the quiz, and it was only like 5 questions, maybe 10, but again, multiple choice. If you guessed, you could pass it. If you just tried a little bit, you could probably pass it. It was not that difficult, but nobody really liked doing it. The only reason kids went through with it is because if you passed it, then you got to go to an enrichment activity. And if you didn't pass it, then you had to go to a remediation activity. And which really wasn't fair to the kids either, because if I would have known on Tuesday that they were struggling with something, I could have done something on Wednesday to make it so that they could understand what was going on. And especially with like getting an overall feel for a specific topic of, nobody understood why sunlight is important for photosynthesis. And oh man, I really messed up on that. So I need to take the time to make sure everybody gets that, so that we can move on to the next thing, so they can articulate it in a way that's not in a multiple choice question. I just think that is really cool. Let's talk a little bit about how you are focusing on the method rather than the content with that, and what is your goal when creating these kinds of spaces for the Pulse entrance and exit tickets?
Yeah, I think those two are really good examples of there's a desired outcome, but there's maybe not a desired output, in the sense of there's some sort of artifact, or there's some sort of like grade level thing you need to be able to do. They give a lot of really interesting, valuable feedback and data to the teacher, but there's not like a right or wrong answer in every situation. And this is an important thing to consider with AI, because we're not yet at the point where AI can be a reliable source of truth in every single instance, right? And you or your listeners, maybe you've toyed around with ChatGPT and stuff to know that. Sometimes you ask ChatGPT something and it gives you an incorrect, or at least an inaccurate answer. Maybe gives you the wrong date or the wrong person. And that's just sort of a part of where the technology is at today. It's not quite reliable as a source of truth with a capital T. We're entering a space more from like a directional, how do we get important data, but also not have high stakes, these high stakes situations. And how do we focus on really what AI is good at, which is imaginative, content. So another example of something that we're doing is like, what if you had like a choose your own adventure where you're exploring the geology of a volcano, right? And you're from the perspective of somebody who's exploring, and you're seeing these sides, and you got to choose what you're going to do next, and each outcome leads to another situation. And so it's kind of this interactive role-playing thing, and AI is really good at that stuff. And so there's a lot more engaging things that can be done with a student, where it's maybe it's hopefully a lot better than like a worksheet or something. But also it's not like, if you misunderstood a specific point in that thing, you're not going to like fail a quiz or something like that, right? So that's kind of a little bit of the method that we're doing. Another thing that's probably interesting to talk about is, we have these ongoing conversations between a chatbot and a student, and obviously we need to make sure those are safe, and that if the student's surfacing major, red flags or concerns, that the teacher's getting that information. But also we're trying to pull out specific types of insights from those conversations. And so, we're trying to tell the teacher, like, is this conversation even on topic or not? Is the student asking about Fortnite when they're supposed to be talking about the water cycle? Or, what are the things that the student is mentioning, especially if it's more of an open-ended thing, or, maybe it's a writing workshop, or maybe it's, more of these conversational, what you did over the summer. What are some of the main themes of the conversation that the teacher can look at a quick glance and summarize what's going on? We're also looking at things like sentiment, right? So is the student in a good mood? Are they happy to be there? Are they really annoyed? Are they tired? Are they bugged, right? Those kinds of, just sentiment data can also really inform how a student and teacher are going to interact during or after class. So, we kind of look at it as we have these ongoing threads of conversation, but then we're always looking at these conversations and analyzing and trying to pull out good data that will, help the teacher. Ultimate goal being, at the end, giving the teacher some actionable things that they can do. And this is another thing that AI will get better at is, what do we do with this data? So just because that Johnny and Susie are struggling and Jacob and Allison aren't, what do you do with that? And hopefully we can do a good job at saying, here's some suggestions of activities you can do, or here's a draft of an email that you can send home to parents, and kind of helping these overworked and under-resourced teachers take the next step without giving them more work to do.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to one thing that you talked about, which is that AI is not really good at being a source of truth, and how that's not your purpose. And what people are thinking is that everybody's going to use AI to cheat. And really what you're saying is there's such better uses of AI than just to do the same thing that we've always done. Like, here are some really, really powerful ways to take something that you have done and make it more meaningful and powerful with these bell ringers and exit tickets that every teacher in the world has done numerous times, right? And so how do you make that a more effective and useful thing? And instead of saying, like, here's AI, it's going to give us all the answers, what we're really talking about is, here's AI that's going to, like, make the experience better for everyone involved. And that does matter a lot to kids who are going through the system. It matters to teachers who are interacting with kids on a daily basis. Those things, they're not insignificant, and they do make a big impact. And we've all heard stories of teachers who have remembered something about a kid and brought it up at the right time, and that kid has then, said, wow, this teacher really changed my life because I know they really care. And so that brings us to this question of safety and red flags. How are you managing that? Because this is a really sensitive area. You're collecting a ton more information about each of the students through these activities. How do you keep the kids safe, keep them from, doing inappropriate things, but then also make sure that you're not harvesting data and, still being able to be compliant with FERPA at the very least as, like, the price of admission, right? But then how do you take it a step further and make sure that you're really protecting their privacy and not letting inappropriate things happen because there's so much more information about them out there? What are the steps you're taking to do that?
Yeah, really important question, and something that is always on our minds, especially as this space is moving and changing and tools are coming in and out. We always have to kind of keep the perspective on of data privacy and and security and things like that. I actually just had a superintendent cabinet the other day ask me a similar question, and there are two ways that I think about it personally. And one way is, there's a lot of built-in mechanisms that we use to try to surface the, if there's a content policy violation. Let's say a kid is talking about something unsafe, like self-harm, right? There's sort of two layers of that. One is the layer of the LLM itself. A lot of these tools have built-in content moderation processes that are pretty good when it comes to data privacy and data retention and things like that. Most data, if they get flagged by content moderation, is only persisting for 30 days, just so that it can be reviewed and checked to see if it does in fact include harmful or things that go against the guidelines, so that administrators and people that are involved, stakeholders, can actually act on it. So that's one level, is sort of, there's a systematic approach where there's there's filters and there's alerts and things like that, where if content passes those or trips those alerts, then people that are in the need to know circle can know about those things. Beyond that, we only retain that data as long as it needs to be to be evaluated against those filters. We are still establishing kind of how long we retain student conversational data in general. We want to make sure it's around long enough for the teacher to do something about it. But obviously, beyond the point where the teacher's even teaching the class anymore, we'll do things like scrub the data. The second area where we look at this as being a solution for those sorts of things, and I think this is actually the most important, is transparency, right? There's only so much we can do inside the tool, inside the the chatbot and the AI, to make sure that the conversation is following the tone and the goals that the teacher has set up for it. And kids are smart, right? They're extremely smart and resourceful, and they're going to find ways to make it talk about things that you shouldn't talk about or whatever. And our main guard there is transparency. We're surfacing all of the conversations to the teacher, and we're trying to pull out these insights and these evaluations so the teacher can quickly see, Johnny's talking about something that's not appropriate, and I need to go address it, right? So in that case, students may try to push. They will try to push the envelope, but the teacher will have the ability to act quickly in those situations and know what's going on before it's too late.
Yeah, so I'm hearing a twofold approach. That one, some things are going to be automatic. Two, it's very clear the teacher has access to everything. So whatever you put in there, your teacher will be able to see. And I think that is that's certainly an approach for this kind of stuff, where it's not high stakes and it's more about the things that we've talked about. I won't rehash all of it, but though that transparency piece I think is important. How would you deal with, and this is a hypothetical, so you may not have an answer. That's okay. How would you deal with parents who want to see what their kids are chatting about and things like that? And where, parents want to know is my student having inappropriate conversations with the chatbot, and I want to know what all that is. Have you had any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the best answer for us right now is we want to make sure we do believe that we know that parents are an extremely important, critical stakeholder in the whole process. Obviously, we don't want to just like cut them out of the picture by default. And in fact, we envision tools that will be built for parents down the road that hopefully will be just as empowering for them. One of the things my wife and I have been talking about that would be so amazing is, what if you could have, impromptu parent-teacher conferences with, again, the super intelligent assistant, right? That could tell you some really important things about how your student's doing and how their momentum is looking and what their confidence level is looking like. I mean, that would be so valuable as a parent. When my, like everybody else, I assume, your kids come home and you ask them what they did at school, and it's like, nothing. How was school today? Fine, right? Like, you just don't know very much. And so we want to give parents tools and empower them just as much as we want to anybody else. But we just want to make sure we do that in the right way. And so working with, the districts that we're working with right now, we want to make sure that we're accounting for those use cases without overstepping our bounds when it comes to privacy and security, things like that. So hopefully as we get further down the road, we'll have some more concrete answers there, but we definitely something we're thinking about.
Yeah, and this is something that I don't know that anybody has an answer to right now. On my other podcast, Cyber Traps, we talk about this stuff a lot, and that's one of the areas where nobody has a good answer yet, because it's still so new and so many things are not figured out yet. And so hopefully my dream, Cahlan, is that we can figure those things out before we have lawsuits about it, so that we can not be forced by the law to make those appropriate decisions, but that we can build some of those things in already, so that it's easier for us to manage it all. So that's one of my hopes. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
All right. Any closing words before we sign off? What are you most excited about for the future? What are you most looking forward to being able to create and serve schools with? Anything like that?
I think what I'm most excited about, I mean, for me personally, again, I think what I'm motivated is by giving people powerful tools. And personally, I just love building things, right? I love creating things that people use and find useful, and that they get value from. And whether that's a class where they're learning how to write software and they can go get their next job, or whether it's helping kids to sort of discover that they are empowered and they can do whatever they want in their lives, or whether it's helping teachers to finally feel like they're not just treading water or not even staying above water. That's what motivates me and keeps me going. And one of the things that's so exciting about this field right now is we're just getting started, right? We are just on the very beginning, reps or laps around the track of this AI. Don't want to overstate it here, but this AI revolution that's really going to change a lot of how we interact with software and how we use products and how we engage with even our kids as teachers, right? And that's what's exciting for me is like we are already seeing some amazing things happen, and we're seeing teachers' eyes just like light up, and they're so excited. And it's like, wow, we're just barely getting started. So hopefully this is just a taste of what's to come.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that too. Well, Cahlan, if people want to reach out to you and chat more, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
You can either email me, cahlan@schoolai.com. My name's spelled kind of weird, but it's Cahlan. Or you can find me on Twitter, same thing, Twitter/Cahlan, Cahlan.
Okay, sounds good. Cahlan, thanks so much for being part of Transformative Principal today. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Jethro.